Hello, welcome to Infinite Prattle. This is part two of the episode with Kat. So, as you can see, it's a video episode as well. So, we're going to talk about today. In the previous episode, we talked about Kat's husband, John, and him unfortunately passing away. And this episode is going to be talking about, or Kat's going to be talking about, how she's been dealing with that grief, and also how she's been channeling her energy into also help others deal with grief. So, let's talk about that. You're listening to Infinite Prattle with your host, Stephen. Thanks for joining me for unscripted, unedited, everything. Hello, welcome back, Kat. Thanks very much for joining me again.
Thank you for having me again.
I always break the illusion when I do guest episodes, especially when they go into two parts, that there's probably been like a 2-week gap between part one and part two, but for us it's been like 30 seconds, and I always break that illusion, but I don't want people to think I've been wearing the same clothes for 2 weeks, same with yourself, so.
Likewise, yeah.
I do have more than one hoodie.
It just happens to be an outfit I really like, so I put it back on again.
Yes, to be fair, I do wear a black hoodie quite a lot, so that might be the thing anyway, so.
I do wear a lot of black too, and the red lippy's pretty much a constant as well, so yeah.
It's a good look. Thanks. It's a good look. I only wear wet red lippy on the weekends, so
I can see it working well with the beard.
You know what? It could do. It could do.
I think it might.
So
bit of wing eyeliner as well. You'd be flying.
Hey, I used to wear some eyeliner back in the day, so
there you go.
Back in my goth days, as you know.
Didn't we all?
Exactly. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and in the first part of the episode, we spoke about John, or you spoke about John, and how you got together, and it's a wonderful episode. I know it's good. I know people are going to really enjoy it. So if you haven't already listened to that or watched it, even, you can go back and watch it now. In this episode, I think we're probably going to discuss how you kind of cope with John's death and the aftermath of that, and how you handle grief, and I know you've been doing some wonderful things with grief counselling, and I'd like you to talk to us about that if you can.
Thank you. I think you ended the podcast as well with saying, you're so strong to talk about it the way you do, and
yeah,
that's been a real process of getting to the point where I can.
Yeah.
I mentioned that John was a helper.
Yes.
Everything he did was to help people. His time in the Navy was service. He would just say, I think my purpose on this planet is service. It's to help, to be of help to people. And so when I did eventually start to come around after his death, and it took 5 weeks for them to even release his body from the morgue because of COVID delays. So it was the 15th of December before we buried him. And then my son got COVID headed into Christmas. So all of that Christmas and New Year was spent alone with my son at his dad's. That was just a blur. I don't even really remember that time. So when you say, how do you cope? You don't.
No.
For a long time, you just don't. I think lockdown probably made things worse because my family couldn't travel from Ireland. My mum did illegally. I would say illegally. It wasn't illegal, but it was against guidance because we're really close. I'm so grateful. She's been my saving grace throughout this whole thing. She came over and made me eat for the first 10 days or so, while I was just sitting incredulously at my table. However, the thing that got me out of bed every morning was the fact that my son still needed homeschooling.
Yeah.
And I think if he hadn't, I probably wouldn't have gotten out of bed. I would have stayed there in the last place where I was with John, indefinitely, maybe. It was such a hard thing to do. It's all I wanted to do was just go back and hide under the duvet and pray that I would wake up and find that it was all just a really crappy dream.
Yeah.
That never happened.
We've all had them days, haven't we? We just want to go back to bed. But in that situation, it's like exponentially magnified. Mm-hmm. I've been quite lucky in my life, Kat. Sorry to interrupt you, but I've never really lost anyone super close to me, like a parent or like a sibling or a partner. And I think in one of the episodes previously, in the Dex episode, I spoke about my granddad, and he was probably the closest person that I'd lost. But even then, like I dealt with grief in a different way.
Hmm.
And I'm really interested to hear about, like, because I think that still affects me, and I'm not very good
Yeah.
at I'm not very good at dealing with stuff sometimes, and thinking about my own thoughts. So it really interests me about how he went through that process
Hmm.
to obviously your son played a big part because you kind of have to make that effort for his well
Yeah.
being as well. But aside from that, like how did you, when your son wasn't with you, or when he was at his father's and you were alone, how did you just do everyday things, and did you
For
do
the first
everyday
year,
things?
for the first year, I really didn't. My
No,
house went to shit. It's still not great, but things like that just didn't matter.
no,
And I will be very, very honest, and I will say that for that first year, I didn't know how I could carry on. And so it was a regular, not, and I really want to stress that I was never suicidal,
no,
but there was always the thought in my head that there were only two choices in this scenario, and one was to carry on and one wasn't.
yeah,
Those are the only two choices. When people say, how do you carry on? You don't have a choice. Actually, you do, but the other one is either unthinkable or it's the darkest thought you'll have.
yeah, exactly,
And,
yeah,
and that's as black and white as it gets. There
yeah,
are only two choices.
yeah,
Um, it took me that whole first year, not even kidding, even though I went back to work after 3 months, to get to the point where I realized which of those choices I was definitely engaging with. You know, I was not depressed, I was not suicidal, but I was grieving and constantly thinking that I would join him because people die of a broken heart all the time.
yeah. Well, a broken heart is a real thing, isn't it? It's
Hmm.
a real medical diagnosis, and I don't think people know
Exactly.
that. Like, my mum was diagnosed with that when she got divorced from my dad. Like,
Hmm.
and it's it's a thing. It's a real thing.
Yes,
It's a
it is.
very real
And
thing.
and when you're lying in bed awake at half two, 3 o'clock in the morning, and the world is silent, and you're literally gasping for breath because of the weight
Yeah,
of grief on your chest, you're literally thinking, how I can't physically survive this. Whatever about being strong in my head, how can I physically get through this? I mean, in the first couple of days after John's death, I broke out in hives. I had a kind of a
really.
stress response. Yeah. um, got a flash period. My whole body just almost turned itself inside out, reacting in a very physical way.
Yeah,
And I hadn't expected that at all because, like you said, I hadn't lost anyone ever that close to me. My granddad, some uncles, a friend, certainly, but never somebody within my household. So this huge physical response was insane. The pain, the body aches, the fatigue, incredible. So actually, quite a lot of that is preoccupying, and
yeah,
it's almost your brain and your body's way of distracting you from the emotional overload. Your brain only drip feeds you parts of the grief as well. You don't get to experience that loss all at once because our caveman brain knows that if you do, it would just be overwhelming. You couldn't survive it.
no, no,
And so over time, over lots of time, the fog starts to clear. And you get to a point where you think, okay, today I need to clean the bathroom,
hmm,
or today I want to talk to a neighbor or stand outside and feel the sun on my face. And the first time that I enjoyed a meal that I ate about a year later, I felt so guilty. How could I enjoy a meal after we used to be so close and cook our food together and it was our thing, to cook for each other? Our love
yeah,
language is feeding each other.
yeah.
It's probably why neither of us would ever be skinny.
I know where you
But
come from with that. To be fair.
you know, um, the guilt that came with so many things, the guilt that came with somebody making me laugh. How dare I laugh when John is dead and can't laugh anymore?
Yeah,
And through time, people go, oh, but he'd want you to laugh. And I would think about John, and he loved to be a bit of a drama queen, and I'd think, would he though? Would he be the kind of person who'd go, I want you to mourn me forever?
yeah, yeah.
In a jokey kind of a way. But we'd never had we talked about it? No, not really.
No,
We had talked about the music you would want played at your funeral. So that was something that I got to honor him by doing, was playing Tim McGraw and Brian Adams at his funeral,
Nice.
because I knew we had the conversation, and those were the songs, and um, hearing them was actually a huge consolation, because I knew that that's what he had said he wanted.
I think when you have them
Um,
conversations, though, like they're kind of almost there's like a serious edge to them, probably, isn't there? But probably in the context that you did it, you weren't foreseeing that being a nearby thing. It was like, oh, just like that's that what you'd have, is it? Like it's almost kind
mhm,
of like a joke conversation almost.
exactly.
There's like a serious edge to it. Like at least you had that conversation and you did actually know that was his choice. But
Yeah,
it's not something you've envisaged like, well, actually, in the next couple of years, I'm gonna have to remember this conversation. Like, which is shocking in itself, really, and not a pleasant
but
thing
it's
to
so
think about. It
important.
is. It is. It is.
And that was the catalyst for me realizing, if that conversation is important, that and the fact that we weren't, although you mentioned him at the beginning of the conversation as my husband, we actually weren't married, we were partners.
Oh, you were not.
Um,
Oh, I made that
no,
assumption. I'm
no,
sorry.
no, don't worry. But it's a big part of the reason why I went on to do what I did, because John died intestate, which means there was no will,
Right.
which also means that I could not legally be recognized as his next of kin.
Wow.
And therefore, everything that he owned became his dad's in the first instance.
Yes.
His dad died 3 months after he did. And so everything then became his brother's. And
Oh.
so his brother and his dad turned around to me and said, put all his stuff in his car and drive it over here. And I said, well, I'm not driving at the minute because I can't. I'm not in the right mind to, but you're welcome to come and get whatever. Because
Yeah.
to me, John was gone. What use was any of his material stuff? But it did mean that every penny he had, every penny that we had shared in an account, anything like that, all went to his brother. And I'll say no more on it because it's family stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
And I
But
have I
it's
have forgiven and moved on. Um, you know, it's not the way that I would have handled it if things had been the other way around.
yeah.
But there you go.
And I think that's a difficult situation, isn't it? And
Hmm.
things with death and possessions is always a tough thing. And I think that sometimes is part of grief, isn't it? I think that
Oh
sometimes like how
yeah,
people react to things as well. Like, and you're
it
not
brings
you're
out
not
the worst in people.
yeah,
Yeah,
and you're not
it
always
really
in you're
does.
not always in the normal state of mind, are you? So and
Exactly.
yeah, and I think that's
Yeah,
something to know. But yeah, but that's kind of like another thing to deal with as well for you, though, isn't it? That was like another.
it
It's
is.
just saying that's
But
another thing on top.
it made me realize that we were grieving two very different people. I was
Yes,
grieving my lover, partner, provider, person with whom I had been most intimate and most in love with in my entire life.
yes,
He was grieving a brother with whom he had shared a childhood. In that childhood, and I mentioned this in the last podcast, they had moved to America because John was diagnosed with leukemia, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, when he was
all
7.
right,
And so they upped and moved to America because they were pioneering radiotherapy treatment at the time. And John actually became one of the original Ronald McDonald for Good Times kids in
really,
those camps in America.
wow,
Um, there is an American TV show that he did an appearance on as a young boy, perhaps 11, when he was in remission, where they had some of the kids from those Ronald McDonald camps on talking about their journey. And yeah, you can he's exactly the same person then as he was when I knew him, exactly the same. A cap covered in pin badges, and if you'd seen him as a PCSO, like his stab vest and his everything basically was all covered in as many pin badges as he could get away with. His car was covered in bumper stickers. Every cap he owned, and I'm looking at one of them on the other side of the room, covered in pin badges. All his
yeah.
veterans badges and Oldham FC, who he adored. Bless him, loved an underdog. Um,
Oh dear, oh dear.
um,
Someone's got to,
so
someone's got to,
exactly, yes, somebody has to support him. Um, but that I think that made him the sunny person he was. He had this
Yes,
unique perspective that, as a kid, he had potentially been close to death himself, and he had been given this kind of new lease on life. And whether it was conscious or not, that made him the person he was. All of those things together, John being a helper and me needing to find a way to honor him that wasn't running a marathon for, a charity that would give back to the Stroke Association or whatever, because I'm not a marathon runner by any means. And the issues with his family and the resounding need for conversation, and me wanting to tell people, make a will. I don't care if you're
Yeah.
30 or 130, make a will, put your loved ones in it, keep it up to date. Talk. If you hate lilies, tell your loved ones that you hate lilies and that you'll haunt them for the rest of your life if you put lilies on my grave or on my coffin, and do it in such a way that it's lighthearted. People dread those conversations because they say, oh, they're morbid or they're dark. It's not at all. Surely as we are born, we will die. They are two guaranteed things.
I think people have a very much taboo thing around death and talking about death, and I think I've maybe got a little bit of a different outlook, and I don't know how you feel about this. Like, having Irish relatives, they're very much quite open about death, and I must admit, I had a couple of aunties that would put you in a coffin as soon as you look at you. If you coughed or something, they think you were at the end of your rope. But there's a whole different outlook of funerals and such things over there.
Oh, totally, totally.
They don't.
When you come from a culture that brings the person home to their own house and lies them out on the coffee table,
exactly,
it is a very different
and all that sort of
Absolutely.
thing. And I think. And I think even sometimes in this country, it's taboo to talk about someone that's passed sometimes for fear of upsetting anyone. Whereas my experience of my relatives in Northern Ireland, it's a joyous thing to remember someone. It's a joyous thing to kind of like to go to the funeral and celebrate life and and it's
sing
kind of
and drink whiskey and celebrate.
Tell stories about the person, keep that person alive through story and song and everyone drinks some whiskey and pick up a guitar and sing a song. And I think that we have like quite an insular view on it in England, and I think Scotland are probably similar to the Irish in some sense, where they're quite open about it. But I think my upbringing, my dad's side, the English side of the family, was kind of like we don't talk about them sort of things, or
we hide our emotions, stiff upper lip.
Why are you talking about death? Don't talk about death. And and you can. I mean, my situation with Sarah, and regular listeners will know, and we've had these conversations. We've had that conversation about music at funerals, and you can talk about that, and it's nice because, like, you hope it's not going to be for a long time, but if it isn't, you've got something that they would want, like you're fulfilling a wish, like you said. Like, it's like when that music plays, you think, well, I just didn't pick a random song I thought they'd like. That is what they wanted. So
and it prevents all the family arguments. Nobody can say, no, she would have wanted Tina Turner's XYZ playing.
Exactly.
When you have it written down in her handwriting that says, no, I want Disco Inferno. Thanks very much.
Exactly.
Or whatever it is.
Exactly. I want Sleep When I'm Dead by Bon Jovi.
Nice.
You know what I mean? Just because that's funny to me.
Absolutely. And that's it. You want your funeral to be as much a reflection of you as your entire life was.
Exactly,
not some horrible, somber, and unfortunately it's what John got, and it's not what he deserved, but because of COVID, 30 people in a little church in Oldham.
I was going to say, I bet there was hardly anyone now as well, wasn't there? Yeah, exactly. It should have been. That's what my mum wants. My mum wants the old the New Orleans trumpets paraded down the street. That's what my mum wants.
Yes, and go out with noise. I'm with her. And make noise about me.
She said, like, I want a horse-drawn carriage. I was like, who's paying for this? Come on, like, what's going on here? I was like, really? Like, I thought that'd go down well in Belfast anyway. So,
I want everyone in bright colours. Yeah. I want Paul Simon's The Obvious Child played, because it has this incredible drum track. And if that can be live, then all the better. Good luck finding a drum group who can play that kind of thing. But, just play it loud. Send me out with noise and fury, and do not go gentle into that good night.
No, exactly. Exactly.
But yes, so all of those things, all of those threads, the realization that my culture of storytelling meant that therapy was never going to work for me. Talking to one person, that person bringing me back to the guilt of the being in the moment and the moment of loss, it just didn't help. I tried it through a couple of different channels and it just wasn't useful. So I started to talk to anyone who'd listen. and I guested on a couple of podcasts, told the story that way. One was a fantastic Australian podcast called Remembering Dad, set up for exactly that purpose, just to tell, stories of remembrance. In doing that, I thought, this really helps. Just speaking it out loud, letting the air at it, is therapeutic, because my brain is hearing it and starting to believe it, and it's
Yes.
bringing me along, and I'm moving forward with it.
There's
So I
something to be
set
said
up,
for saying something out loud, isn't
yeah,
there? There is something to be said
yeah.
for that, yeah.
Our brains do believe the stuff that we say as well as the stuff that other people say to us. Um, after coming back to work, I set up the rail industry bereavement support group, and it just started off as a peer group talking group for Network Rail for people who had lost someone in COVID. It expanded into a group for anyone who had lost someone, and then it expanded into an industry-wide, and not just Network Rail. So now it's the whole rail industry are welcome, and we have at least a session a week where we just talk. There's always a mental health first aider in the group. Quite often that's me, but if you're new, you're invited to tell the story of how you lost your loved one, in much the same way as I did on the last episode, and the rest of us observe. And there's such a solidarity in it when you're saying that to people who understand.
Yeah.
Who can go, yes, I know that feeling. I know that the feeling of nausea when you pick up something of theirs and think, I must throw this away 2 years later, and you think, no, I still can't chuck their toothbrush, or whatever. And ultimately our tagline is, it's just shit, because it is.
Yeah.
There is nothing else to say. It
Yeah.
can't be changed. It can't be undone. You can't go back on it. You can't take anything back once it's been given over and that person is gone. So we just exist together in grief. And that's what we do. And in doing that, in sharing that, people have said that it has given them extraordinary comfort. It has kept them in work. It has kept them sane, knowing that they're not cracking up, being awake at 2:30 a.m, feeling these awful feelings. We have a lot of widows and widowers in there, but we also have people who've lost children, who've lost parents, siblings, everyone and anyone. And everyone is welcome if you have had a loss, just to talk in that space. From there, I thought, I need to do more to be of service. And this idea of service wouldn't leave me, because the only way that I can honor John on the daily is service. And that's when the idea of grief coaching came to me, this concept of working across society to just have conversations about death, and to break the taboo, and to try and get people to see that it is so. Death and taxes, they're the only absolutes in your life. Why would we not talk about them? In fact, I think most English people would prefer to talk about taxes than they would about death. But you're exactly right with the cultural thing. Having grown up, so my granddad was killed by a drunk driver when I was 2 years of age. He was a pedestrian on the road and just taken out. That was my first experience, and I effectively was a little bit too young to experience the actual loss, but I wasn't to know the repercussions on my family as I grew up. That huge sense of injustice around his death, and that kind of a thing. As I grew up, I come from an enormous Irish Catholic family on both sides. I have 134 immediate relations. That's just aunts, uncles, cousins. Enormous. So there would always be somebody sick or dying or dead. So funerals were quite a regular thing, but so was observing somebody's physical remains, as we call it in Ireland, their body laid out in a coffin. Observing at 13, my dad come and kiss his grandmother's forehead, pale and waxy as she was, bless her, and hold her hands, and it completely dispelled the fear of anything to do with a corpse for me, because it was that's just my great granny. Okay, so she's still, and her energy is elsewhere, but it's still her that we love. So that's how I grew up with it. And to hold John then in those moments shortly after he died and kiss his eyes like he loved, and tell him over and over that I loved him, meant so much. And to be able to come away and talk and have people feel free to say that back
Yes.
just became therapy in and of itself. And so over the last few years, I have started to help people with their grief by, I say, coaching, by just asking them questions and encouraging them to tell their story.
Just to talk
And
about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
because you can't say, right, well, here's a lovely model that will help you recover. There is no recovery. You're going to live with grief for the rest of your life in some capacity.
Yeah.
You will grow around it, but the loss never shrinks. The loss never gets any less. I will love my John till the day I die myself.
Yep.
And for those who believe that there's something wonderful afterwards, I hope that's the case. But for me, it gets a bit complicated, having been married and divorced and then with someone. And let's face it, if I was going to go again, we might have to do the whole Henry VIII thing and end up with a beheading, but that gets very messy. So for me, the concept of an afterlife where people have a form gets complex. But what I truly believe, because of my experiences afterwards, is that all that is good of you, all of your energy goes back into the universe.
Oh yeah, definitely.
We are all a little bit Stardust, a little bit Elvis, a little bit Albert Einstein, a little bit of all of those good energies that have gone around before in the ultimate eco process. We're recycled energy from other people and from Stardust. And if that's the case, then some lucky bugger is going to get some of John's energy, and it's just, it's going to be incredible. But
energy is not destroyed or created; it's just moved around.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I
absolutely.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now I talk, and people say, "Oh, you're so strong," and it's not. I'm just used to talking about it, because in the early
I think
days,
that's what I was getting at before. I think because you've been strong to get to that point, I would say, but now because you know the words and you know the situation, you just, I wouldn't say comfortable to talk about it, but you're able to. And,
it's an act of service. I'm honouring John when I do it.
Exactly. By talking about it, it's a remembrance thing. It's and conversely, you kind of help other people, because there might be someone else that thinks, actually, I don't talk about that person that I really loved, and I probably should talk about the person I really loved. And it kind of comes back to that cultural thing, isn't it? About just mentioning someone is
exactly
the best thing you can do. And it might upset you sometimes, or it might make you joyous,
And that's it. So what's wrong with being upset?
No, exactly.
We have this big, I shouldn't be upset. Of course you can be upset.
Yeah.
How are you ever going to appreciate the joyous moments if you can't take a chance to be upset and sad?
Exactly. And I had a friend that passed away, and I just smile every time I think about him, because he was just he was a lot older than me. It was a weird situation. It was my girlfriend's mum's partner, basically, and but after me and my girlfriend broke up, because it was when I was at college, me and him basically were friends. We became friends, and he was like, what, 30 years older than me, but it was fine. He was just he was like a second dad, to be fair. And he was he could, don't get me wrong, he was Scottish, and he had a tongue on him when he wanted to, but he was just he was just the nicest guy, and I just cannot do anything but, if I think about him or talk about him, just think just such happy thoughts, because he was just, there wasn't one moment I wasn't with him where I laughed. He would make you laugh every time you were with him, his proper belly laugh as well.
And wouldn't you love to know that after you've gone, there might be somebody who would think of you that way?
Exactly. I think he kind of changed my perception on death, weirdly, because I think is what you were talking about before, about talking about John, and I've kind of realized that's kind of what I do with him, really. As I talk, when I talk about him, when I think about him, I do think that. I think, God, I hope someone thinks about me like that when I'm gone.
Yeah. What's his name? Your friend's name?
He was called Ernie. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he was he used to drink a bit too much whiskey, let's say, but he was the best storyteller. He could spin a yarn, let's say, and he would hold the attention of everyone in the room, and have everyone in hysterics for hours. Like he was,
That sounds
yeah,
amazing.
he was quite a chap. But it's one of the things, isn't it, that time goes on, but then feelings don't really diminish. Like
Because love doesn't
I
diminish.
still
Yeah.
feel the same joy as when as if he was here now, which is which is amazing, really.
It is. It's
And you're so right.
gorgeous.
We shouldn't like cast that aside and
Mhm.
ignore that. We should talk about it. So, and I think it's amazing what you're doing with the whole, like, just talking to people, encouraging that. I think that's such a, it's kind of like such a simple idea, but it has such like massive like ramifications for people. I
Mhm.
think, and I think it's just a simple concept, and I don't think people would realize how much that would help them. To be honest, I think it's just such a lovely thing. So yeah,
Thank you.
no,
Yeah, and it
thank
really does
you for
help.
that.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm sure you've helped quite a few people already.
I can only go on the feedback, because
Yeah,
I'm not I'm a pretty humble person,
yeah,
but yes,
definitely.
people have
Yeah,
said that it has helped them enormously,
and that's
and
and
people have said that it's helped them more than any therapy that they've had.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know,
I think sometimes, as you say though, just saying something out loud to the universe does do a lot to
mhm.
hear yourself say something rather than it just being like an internal voice. It is quite impactful, isn't it?
That's it.
You know,
Especially grief gives you some fairly shocking thoughts sometimes and some kind of weird emotions. Some people who lose someone are almost relieved because of the relationship they had with that person.
yes,
That can be very difficult to talk about with other people. But I completely understand it. Not with John, but with other relationships that I've lost. And um, knowing some of the very complex feelings I had through my grief, and again, strangely, the desire to be dead but not be suicidal, which is
yes,
such an odd way to think. The desire to be with him, I guess, in wherever he was, um, but without the wanting to go through the process. That's such an alien thing to feel when days previously you were so full of life. You know, um, it just throws your head into all kinds of really weird places. So to be able to speak that to somebody who understands and who isn't going to go, let's go get you some mental health support. This is grief and it's very different.
yes, yes. And as you say, it's always something that's going to be there, isn't it? It's always going
Hmm.
to be there in some form or the other. Some days it'll subside a bit, but it'll always be in the background of your head. There'll be always something that, as you say, is something like picking up a toothbrush and saying, "I probably should throw that away," and then having that twang of guilt and twang of like, "Oh, but it was their toothbrush," and
Hmm.
it's such a strange thing, like such a finality of getting rid of a possession like
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah.
It's such a we're strange beings. We get
We
connected to
are.
stuff like that, really, aren't we?
Just this week, I mean, John is dead 3.5 years. Just this week, my son plucked out a bottle of Irish Spring shower gel that was bought in America by John when he did Route 66 with a
Really?
friend of his. Yeah, and my son used it in the shower. And previously, when he had tried to, because it smells gorgeous, um, I would get upset with him and say, "That's John's, put it back."
Yeah,
And this week, I thought, it's not John's anymore. It's just shower gel and it's starting to go off. Let the child use it.
yeah,
Let it go. Shower gel isn't John. It will never be John. All that's left is the memory, and the memory I treasure by telling the story to
definitely.
anyone who listens.
And you're
So
doing so
thank
much.
you to
You
you and your listeners.
No, you're doing so much justice when you tell it as well. You can just I almost like it. The way you say it, I almost think I know John. The way
Hmm.
you describe him and the way you and I always want to know John as well. I wanted to know
Yes.
John. I wanted to know what he was like, and I think it's just such an incredible uh story. It's that I'm so thankful that you share
Thank you so much.
it. Well, I'll put all your links in the description of the episode. So if anyone if anyone has been triggered by anything that's in these episodes and feels like they would benefit from some help, I'm sure you can contact Kat and she'll be willing to discuss things with you. So I'll put the links to her Facebook and that in the description, and we you can get in contact if you want, and share this episode and get people talking about death. Um, because it's not that taboo. We all we
Mm-mm.
as you say, taxes and death are the most definite things in the world, and and learn something about what people want at the funeral. I'm just thinking to myself, like, I wouldn't have any clue what my dad would want, or really what mum, apart from my mum wanting a big brass band. I have no idea what songs she would want or anything, and it almost makes me think that I probably should just call them and say, if you died, which sounds terrible to say, but it's like it's not, is it? Like it's a reality.
No,
it's a reality.
Just want to be prepared.
I want to know, like, what would you want?
It so much brings you so much peace to be able to go, that's exactly what she wanted.
Exactly.
My mum has said in no uncertain terms, because my mum makes the most incredible brown soda bread.
Oh.
She has said, everyone, all of my cousins, they come to our house, my family house, to have my mum's soda bread or my mum's buns, because she's a brilliant baker. She said, if anyone brings a loaf of brown soda bread down that aisle as a symbol of my life, I shall rear up out of that coffin and give you all what for.
Nice.
But the fact that we can talk about it in that way is just incredible. So
it's such
if anyone dares.
Yeah, exactly. I think we need to kind of like destigmatize it a bit. But I really appreciate you coming on, and I think we'll bring it to a close there if you don't mind, Kat, and say links in the description. And once again, thank you so much. I've been waiting for this for a long time, and I'm really pleased you've come onto the podcast. I think
it's been such a pleasure.
I think everyone's going to love these episodes. I think it's well, I would hope they do anyway, but I do.
Thank you so much.
I've got so much out of it.
Maybe sometime again I can come back and talk about all the other things that happen in and around my life, like ADHD and menopause and all those wonderful things that could be spoken about.
You have an open invitation to come back whenever you like.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope everyone's enjoyed the episodes. Say like and subscribe and share them, and don't be scared of death, and share and talk to people. And talk to people like Kat if you do have any issues and just want to share. So thank you very much, and I'll leave it there, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thanks for listening to Infinite Prattle with your host Stephen. Follow me on social networks at Infinite Prattle, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks very much.